Members, we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting of the panel on education. First, the agenda today. Proposal of setting up the Teacher Professional Development Fund. This is an item with financial implications, so I have invited non-panel members to join this meeting. Members who would like to speak, please press the Request to Speak button. So first, I invite the Undersecretary for Education, Mr. Jeff See, to walk us through the paper. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I thank the panel for arranging this special meeting today for these two funding proposals. Quality education hinges on teachers. Teachers play a pivotal role. That's why the government is committed to offering diversified training programs and activities to support the professional development of teachers. This is to enhance the cultivation of teachers' ethics and norms. We want to create a high-quality teaching force. The 2024 policy address proposed a number of measures on teachers' professional development. Measures enhance existing measures such as the core training for newly joined teachers and teachers seeking promotion. There are also mainland study tours, leadership training. We will also support measures to invigorate our country through science and education. There will be different training measures. This means collaboration with mainland and overseas training institutions and bodies. This is to strengthen training and create a culture of teaching and research. We will also continue to strengthen teachers' guidelines. We will commend outstanding teachers and promote teachers' ethics. There will also be pilot schemes about a leadership scheme for teachers and principals. We will nurture teachers and principals with potential under that scheme. We will also set up the iJourney Scholarship. That's to encourage teachers to take part in overseas training. This is to broaden their horizons and build up their capacity. Now, the core training for teachers and also collaboration in overseas and mainland training, that's funded with the $500 million non-recurrent funding from 2017. That pot of money will run out after the 2026 to 27 school year. This means to deliver the new measures under the policy address and to ensure continuity in the measures, we will need a steady stream of money. The 2024 policy address proposed $2 billion for the Teachers' Professional Development Fund. This is to ensure a steady source of money for teachers' professional development. This is to continuously launch and enhance teacher training and exchange programs. It will take time for that money to generate investment income to meet the annual expenditures. That's why we need to set up that fund within this financial year so that we have money to invest and generate the income. That money will be placed with the exchange fund under the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. That will be used to meet the expenditure related to teachers' professional development starting from 2027 to 28. This will be a trust. The Permanent Secretary for Education Incorporated will be the trustee of that fund. And we will follow the structure in the framework and salient points set out in the trust deed in managing that fund. We plan to entrust COTAP, that is Committee on the Professional Development of Teachers and Principals, to advise on the fund. The audited accounts will be submitted to LegCo every year. For this fund, we look forward to the support from this panel so that we can submit the proposal to the Finance Committee for approval within this financial year. I will stop here and I will welcome questions from members. Dr. Teck Chi-yuen, is that a point of order? I support both funding proposals. Will both proposals reach the Finance Committee for further discussion? So the two items are different, so I will get to the items one by one. I want to find out how this will go. If we can have a detailed discussion at the Finance Committee, then I may have different plans. Now, we will deal with items 1 and 2 differently. Item 2, the proposal on launching the research matching grant scheme. That item will also come with financial implications. Just before this meeting, we were notified by the Education Bureau. The second item, the one on research matching grant, that proposal will be part of the draft estimates for the 2025 to 26 financial year. So different approaches for items 1 and 2. Now we have dealt with the point of order. So let's get into the discussion. 4 members have pressed the request to speak button. 4 minutes each member, questions and answers inclusive. We start with Mr. Ronick Chen. Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the item. I'm looking for further information if this item goes to the FC, and that's the TExcel. There are 8 different projects. The annex simply sets out the number of people who have been covered without a breakdown in the expenses under each head. We want to know how much money has been spent under each head of the TExcel scheme. So I would like a detailed breakdown of the expenditure. Now, I'll turn to my second point. I get it. You have $399 million left. And once you factor in the extra expenditure of $30 million, you will have roughly $350 million left, and that money will dry up in a few years' time. Now, I looked at the $2 billion. I crunched the math myself. Let's look at $290 million as a return. We have the money up to 2063. Take 4.1% as the rate of return. You stick to the $300 million. That money will be good through 2062. I crunched the numbers. 1.5 billion is all that you need. You will have money for 2049. At 4.1%, you can last till 2058. That's still a long period of time. So, at the FC, can the Education Bureau give us a detailed analysis of the returns and expenditure so that we can tell whether the amount makes sense? Because I think the money can last for a very long time, Undersecretary. I thank Mr. Chen for his support. Now, in the appendix, we have some details. Sure, we can provide further details at the FC. We can provide a breakdown, the rating of different heads under TExcel. We can do that at the FC. Now, we got $500 million back then, but this year's policy address proposed new measures. So we can only show members the financial position now. There will be extra measures in the future, and you don't see that reflected in the appendix. So we will elaborate on the new measures when we get to the FC. I get what the member was getting at with his calculations. We're trying to leave the principle untouched for the $2 billion so that we meet the expenditure purely with the investment return on that principle of $2 billion for teachers' professional development. With the $500 million, we were going to spend that money. So there's a different approach. This time, for the $2 billion, we want a steady stream of money. So we go on a rate at 4.1% for the return. And then you multiply that by $2 billion, you get $80 million or so per year. So that's roughly the amount of money we will need each year. Now, on the money, by 2027-28, there will be a greater need for expenditure. When we take a long-term view, the annual expenditure will be roughly $80 million. Undersecretary, I think you've noted Mr. Chen's question, so please give us the supplementary information before the FC meeting. Mr. Lam Chensing. There are different training programs under this fund. Teachers have to go for dozens of hours of continuous professional development, and then there are mainland overseas training programs. So a teacher will have to commit more than 100 hours into training. I don't question the desire of teachers for training, but teachers have their plates full, and teachers have to work on life planning for students, and they have administrative work and national education. Can we strike a balance? Can we remove the administrative workload of teachers so that teachers can focus on teaching and professional development? Teaching, or rather training programs, should be more than just attendance numbers at each school. Should we have a dedicated person? It could be a departmental head or the principal. That person should coordinate the training programs and arrange training programs based on the strength of each teacher, because the principal or this officer knows teachers at their school's best, and these people can give quick feedback to the Education Bureau about how well the training programs work. Now, many teachers have to go to the mainland for exchange. It's one country, two systems. Hong Kong and the mainland each has their strengths in their education system. Now, Hong Kong's teachers can learn from the success stories from the mainland system. Can we get our teachers to share our strengths with the mainland during those exchange tours? If we do that, we can show teachers that our teachers can also share their insights. They can contribute to the mainland system. So can we have this two-way exchange, and that will make the training more attractive? Undersecretary. Thank you. Now, based on the current indicators for training, we think what we have now works well. For new teachers, in-service teachers, and teachers seeking promotion, there's a framework with requirements. Teachers generally can meet the requirements. Those requirements are by no means onerous. Teachers can keep up with the latest developments by taking part in training. They can build up their professional capacity. We believe schools will bear in mind their priorities and the needs of their teachers as schools arrange training for teachers. Now, on whether we should have a dedicated officer at the school to coordinate the training programs for teachers. Training programs vary. Having this single coordinator will be a bit too much for that officer. Now, we already have SENCO and integrated education coordinators. And then you have departmental heads. You also have a coordinator for national education. Each coordinator focuses on their respective area. Say, you have a departmental head for the Chinese subject. That head will also look at Chinese learning for non-Chinese speaking students. So that department head can keep an eye on the training programs. We believe that's the better way forward than having a single coordinator covering everything. Now, on mutual learning, I fully agree with the member. Last month, we discussed sister schools at this panel. There are also other forms of professional exchange between Hong Kong schools and mainland schools. So it's not just Hong Kong learning from the mainland. It's a two-way process. Hong Kong has its own experience in classroom management. We also have built up our experience, and Hong Kong teachers can share that with their mainland peers.
Next, Dr. Chow Man Kong. Thank you. I'll be brief. My first question is, you said that there is a 500 million non-recurrent funding, and I believe you didn't rely on an investment return back then, right? Correct. It was a one-off injection, and we spent the principal as well. So the training expenditure is approximately $44.2 million. So the difference, does it come from additional training, which is why you want to set up a fund instead? Correct. As said in the policy address, there are numerous new education-related measures, and the 2 billion fund to be set up will be used on 4 main projects on technology and mathematics education, as well as some training on the use of big data and AI. And there are also training to support the healthy development of students, as well as mainland exchange activities for principals and teachers. The fourth area would be research projects to explore new effective learning and teaching products. All right. I do see many trust funds under the Education Bureau. So you tend to set up a trust fund and you get return to support projects. How many do you have? You have the Quality Education Fund. You also have the Belt and Road Scholarship Fund. Well, Undersecretary, perhaps you can give such information after the meeting. Well, while you try to be brief, please give me some time to invite who is to speak. All right? Chair, can I speak now? Okay. I can see that for each 3-year cycle, teachers would have to take part in 150 hours of training. For new teachers or teachers aspiring for promotion, they have to take a 30-hour training. I want to ask how much of such training is face-to-face, how much is online? We do want more training for teachers. But then if it is only online, some may just leave it on while they do other things. We don't want this to happen. Is it possible that you can increase the ratio of training to be provided face-to-face? Thank you. Undersecretary. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Chow. We have training sessions that are mostly face-to-face. During the pandemic, we did consider having training online. But then there are restrictions. For example, for national security education training, it would involve group discussion formats. It is hard to give such training online, therefore. We have heard feedback from teachers however, that we can be a bit more flexible in the provision of training, allowing teachers to take online training. And for gifted education, we have 3 levels of training. But most of such training would be face-to-face as well. Only some are online. Thank you. Chair, I have one more question. All right, you can proceed. On training content, sometimes we have received complaints that the training content deviates from what is advertised. And in fact, there is illegal content included as well that may contravene the national security law or safeguarding national security ordinance. So is there something you can do about this? Thank you, Undersecretary. If there is training that would advertise breaking the law to achieve justice, that is not acceptable. If you have such information, please let us know. For each of our training sessions, we would collect feedback from participants. And we would ask them to score the sessions, and we would review the feedback, and we would follow up on any potential contraventions. Thank you. Mr. Dennis Leung. I agree that strengthening education takes precedence strengthening a nation. But what is more important is to safeguard national security. So I want to ask, with this fund set up, how can the Bureau strengthen national security education so that we can provide training to teachers for them to understand the importance of national security education? There are significant differences between students' learning progress, and there is really a need to provide special education. We have already passed the mandatory reporting of child abuse bill. How can we teach teachers to know about the importance of reporting of child abuse so that they can help children in need? Also, with investment, it's not always that we will make a profit. With the funds set up, is it possible to have a reserve so that when we suffer losses in a particular year, there will still be funds to support the expenditure on training? Thank you. Undersecretary. Thank you. For the first question relating to national security education, for newly joined teachers aspiring for promotion, as well as in-service teachers, we have already added education and training in relation to Constitution and the basic law, so that teachers are educated about national security as well as one country, two systems. We will continue to hold training sessions in relation to law-abidingness for teachers. So please rest assured, member, there is adequate training. As for the learning differences of students and the training in relation to the mandatory reporting of child abuse, we are preparing for such. For the 4 major areas of training projects, one of them would be to support the healthy development of students. We would provide training to teachers in this regard. This may sound quite broad. I can give you some specifics. So, for example, we can teach teachers how to better support students with mental health needs, enhancing awareness of teachers in relation to the mandatory reporting of child abuse, as well as how to deal with bullying in schools. For the third question, on investment return of the fund. Indeed, we do expect fluctuations in investment return. We will keep in view of the situation. We will also liaise with the FSTB colleagues to monitor the investment returns. We can't be too prudent to try to save up money for training projects because there are some training sessions that we must provide to teachers. But if we see a good return for a financial year, it's not the case that we would spend everything for a particular year. If we see exceptional returns, it's not that we would spend everything. We would save up some so that for another financial year that is not doing so well, we'll still have the funds to support our training needs. We have experience in this, so we will make sure to use the fund as we need. Thank you. Mr. Benson Look. Thank you. I understand and support the aim and purpose for setting up the Teacher Professional Development Fund. But I want to ask about the implementation. I note in paragraph 4, it is said in the 2022-2023 policy address, the chief executive said for the newly joined teachers in public sector schools would be required to participate in the mainland study tours. And starting from the 2023-24 school year, all public sector school teachers substantively promoted to a higher rank are required to complete the mainland study tours. Also, principals would have to undertake 50 hours of CPD activities per year. I think in-service training is beneficial to teachers, especially such, because it would help enhance teachers' understanding of the mainland. But I want to say on record that for teachers having to go on mainland study tours, how many did not end up going? That is, for those that are promoted within 2 years, how many of them did not go on such mainland study tours? How will they be dealt with under the established mechanism? Next, on the operations of the fund. In the paper, it is said that the investment return will amount from $53 million to $82 million, and according to estimations, the training expenditure would be $18 million per year. Another member asked about the operations of the fund earlier. So I want to ask the Education Bureau, if you can't fund the annual training cost, will you be using the principal to fund the training expenditure? Thank you. Undersecretary. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your support, Mr. Look. On teachers' training, whether they are participating in mainland study tours or the CPD hours requirement, the fulfillment of such or the participation of such, we have electronic records on these. And the system works to compile records of teachers' training. This can also act as a reference for teachers so that they can plan for their future training. For teachers nearing the deadline, if they aren't even close to fulfilling the requirement, the Education Bureau will liaise with them. We will ask them to explain the situation. We may issue letters to the relevant institutions that the teachers work at. We will also deal with on a case-by-case basis. For teachers not undertaking training, we may conduct disciplinary hearings. We may issue advice or warning letters if necessary. As for the investment return of the fund, from 2025 to 2028, the investment return, according to the medium range forecast, we expect to have from 2025 to 2028, the rate of investment return is assumed to be in the range of 2.9% to 4.1%. And we will make plans accordingly for the operations of the fund. If we do not have adequate returns, we do not rule out the possibility of using the principal. But in the long term, we want to make sure the fund is sustainable.
請問局方有
Madam Chair, I was looking for figures. Do we have the numbers of teachers who fail to meet the requirements of the CPD? Figures. Do we have the figures? Madam Chair, as I said, we have a system. We keep an eye on the situation. We've advised some teachers, and then some of these teachers left their job, and in other cases, follow-up actions were taken. So please give us supplementary information after the meeting. If you cannot give us the figures right away, if not, give us the supplementary information after the meeting. Mr. Kenneth Low. Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the policy goal of professional development for teachers. The knowledge young people need to pick up evolves with time, but I'm struggling to make sense of one point. It's about the $2 billion. Mr. Ronick Chan raised this question. Why set up a fund with $2 billion? And then we meet the expenditure with the investment return? Why not provide an annual recurrent funding instead? We have been in talks with government officials recently. We have learned that revenue has been falling for the government due to the economic context and COVID from the past few years. Now we put $2 billion into this fund, and then we generate returns. With business, we know the cash flow matters. So will we consider providing a recurrent funding instead? Or can we set up some kind of standing recurrent funding mechanism? Mr. Benson Locke raised a question about teachers' attendance in mainland tours. For these mainland exchange tours, so what are the goals? I know learning about the country, but how do teachers learn about our country through exchange tours? What are some specifics? So again, a question about mainland exchange tours for teachers. Undersecretary. The reason for setting up a fund for this purpose is that the government has a committee, and that's COTAP, Committee on Professional Development of Teachers and Principals. COTAP looks at teachers' training needs, latest developments in education, and then COTAP lays down the training goals and looks for training programs. We need resources. Ideas may be raised at the committee based on the 4 areas I mentioned. Once this COTAP puts forward ideas, we want the resources to be there to support the training needs. Investment returns fluctuate. But there's always the core training for new teachers, teachers seeking promotion. We already have a well-established core training module starting from 2021-22. That framework has already been in place. And then on top of that, we will be promoting education on digitalization. There will be new training programs. A fund will give us flexibility in meeting the needs in training. The member asked about mainland exchange tours. As the member noted, the goal is to give teachers a deeper understanding of our country's latest development. That way, teachers are in a better position to discharge their duties in national education and national security education. Now, there are teachers' research and exchange bases. We have a collaboration with the South China Normal University. We can leverage the strength of mainland institutions and networks so that we can offer diversified and signature training programs. Now, there are exchange schemes for outstanding teachers from Hong Kong and their peers from the mainland. So Hong Kong's teachers learn not just about the mainland's situation, but also the successful experience from the mainland. We want to foster that kind of effort too. And then we also have this leadership enhancement scheme for teachers and principals. We want to leverage the mainland's experience for our teachers' professional development. Now, more teachers are waiting to speak, so I will be strict with the time limit, 4 minutes questions and answers. So let's observe the time limit. Mr. Stanley Ng. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I follow up on Mr. Kenneth Leung's first question? Investment returns vary. There are losses and gains. So if you have a year of losses, will we ditch training for teacher in that year? Can the government explain why set up a $2 billion fund instead of giving recurrent funding for teachers' training? We need clarity on this point. For an optional scheme, a fund will do. But for an important scheme that requires recurrent funding, why go for a fund which carries risks? Even the exchange fund does not make money every year. There are losses. So do we ditch teachers' training when this fund suffers a loss? Undersecretary. Thank you. A fund will give us greater flexibility. There are core training modules. But on top of that, there will also be different training programs. For new teachers, for example, their demand varies with time. In 2020 to 21, for new teachers, a requirement was put in place. All those teachers have to go to the mainland for training. But then the student population is expected to shrink. That means the training needs of new teachers will fall. This is a standing program, but the number of teachers will vary over time. Having a recurrent funding will be too rigid because one day the demand shrinks and we can only use the recurrent funding for one specific purpose, and we are losing flexibility. We mentioned education on digitalization and also the latest trends in education. Different training needs arise over time. And then over time, we have new developments such as training on mandatory reporting of child abuse. The bill was only passed in recent months. In a few years' time, training needs will change. And then this fund will allow us to redeploy our resources to areas where they are needed. We can see in areas like artificial intelligence, big data, INT education, the training needs in these areas will simply grow. We will need extra resources on top of the money already set aside. The fund will give us greater flexibility in deploying resources. But of course, we will use the money only with caution. We have COTAP, the Permanent Secretary for Education Incorporated, will also be keeping an eye. Every year, we will report to LegCo how we have used the money. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwok. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm all for this fund. Of course, a profit is not guaranteed with the fund. Now, when we looked at the Belt and Road Scholarship, it was only in 2 years that we did not make a profit. We will have recurrent training needs. And the government said we can only make $50 million each year, but the training needs will cost $80 million. This means extra money is needed. In the long run, the fund will be a good measure. The fund will also give us certainty because we will know we have a certain pot of money for teachers' training. So in this case, we will need to plan with care. Education on technology is an area where we need to step up teachers' training. Now, teachers' training looks fragmented. It's all over the place. New items pop up from time to time. So since we have this opportunity, can we plan holistically? Can we have different areas of training? Say you have an area about national education, another area subject-specific knowledge, and then you have an area on teachers' ethics, and then another area on counseling, another area on students' needs. That will offer a better structure for teachers, and then schools can also look at their needs and then arrange different training sessions for their teachers. I have a question for new teachers. Why require training only after the teacher joins? Can we require the mainland study tours while people are still pursuing their postgraduate diploma in education? Can we arrange the mainland study tours in advance? And that will mean less disruption for the teachers because they have to go on the study tours while at work. You will always have some overlap when the teacher has to spend time off the school for visits.
Undersecretary, I would like to thank Ms. Lillian Kwok's support for setting up the fund for holistic planning or to facilitate teachers in understanding more about the classification of different types of training. For example, to understand better students' needs, technology education. To make things a little clearer, we can explore how to facilitate teachers' planning by providing them with more information, especially with the training calendar, whether we can provide some sort of classifications so that teachers can know more about what a specific training course type is. We will discuss with COTAP how to match better the needs of teachers. On study tours being offered to pre-service teachers, that is teachers still or students still studying teacher education. So right now we have PGDE students. We also have students studying Bachelor in Education, but there are people that have yet to take such training who are already teachers. Because schools can engage teachers that do not have any academic qualifications in education. We may have not many of them, but in August of last year, because we wanted to recruit more STEAM teachers in primary schools, we have relaxed some requirements. So if we require only pre-service teachers to go on mainland exchange tours, it may not cover everyone. But the benefit of offering such training only to teachers who have already joined the sector, they can benefit in the sense that they have more experience so that they can learn more when they're exchanging their experiences with mainland teachers. Thank you. Professor Liao Qipeng. Thank you. I have already expressed my support for setting up the fund before. Let me ask my questions here. So we have seen recently many students committing suicide. Teachers are of course concerned about students, but is such concern effective in the sense that it will prevent suicides? Can the fund provide training to teachers so that they know more about the psychology of students, how to counsel students, for example, and how they can help enhance students' mental well-being? Thank you. And the Secretary, I would like to first thank the member for his support of setting up the fund. There are 4 areas of training programs under the fund, and one of the areas would be supporting the teachers so that they can help support the healthy development of students. It would also have training for teachers on how to better support students with mental health needs. Every year we have 60 hours of training for teachers on the prevention of suicides. That is for students with suicidal tendencies. We need teachers to have an awareness that they have to play the role of gatekeepers. We also have workshops. We have 20 additional dedicated sessions on this year. The fund will continue to attach great importance to training provided in this area. Chair, I have a follow-up question. I want to know how much such training would take up in the whole scheme of things. And will you be inviting teachers to take part in such training, in particular, especially teachers from the schools that have seen student suicides? Alright, so is such training mandatory voluntary, and what is the timeline for providing such training? Thank you, Chair. If a particular school has greater needs for such training, we will definitely try to support the school in this. All right, it's my turn to speak. I think setting up funds is quite common in universities because for the sponsoring of professorship, it would already cost over $100 million, and the salaries of such professors would come from the fund. And even if the fund suffers losses, they do not have the fund to pay the professors. They would always have injections, top-ups made to the fund. But then we have also observed that for some professorships that have ended after a decade or so, it would be renamed, for example. But of course, we want a fund that can provide long-term returns. But then if the fund is not doing so well, it would require top-ups. But let me say this, even if we do not set up a fund, if we provide recurrent funding, you would still get funding. So it's really pointless saying how much return we're getting every year, whether we are making a profit or making a loss, whether we have to make injections after a decade. We have seen economic fluctuations. We have seen funds doing well for a particular year, not doing so well in a particular year. I think if you set up a fund, it will be a more stable arrangement. As for the training projects, I think there's always new training content due to advancements in different areas. So that's it for what I have to say almost. For training for teacher ethics, how to better support students, technology education, especially ability to use big data and AI, I'll let your expert committee decide the content of training for teachers. All right, any other questions from members? If not, I'll ask members this. But before I actually ask, I remind members that in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, members should disclose the nature of any direct or indirect pecuniary interests relating to this item before we vote. Let me first ask members. Do members agree to submit the proposal to the Finance Committee for discussion? For those who agree, please raise your hands. Excuse me, I would first like to declare that I am a registered teacher. Well, so you can decide on whether you should vote. Well, I have already seen a majority in our last vote. Some didn't express their stances. I respect that, but the majority agrees that the proposal should be submitted to the Finance Committee for discussion. The next agenda item is the proposal on launching the research matching grant scheme. When answering a member's question earlier, I already said this. Right before we commenced this meeting, I received a notification from the Education Bureau that the Bureau plans to include this funding proposal in the estimates of expenditure for the financial year of 2025 to 2026. This item involves a funding proposal. We have invited other LegCo members to join the discussion of this item. Members who would like to speak on this item, please press the request to speak button. I also invite Undersecretary Mr. Jeff See to brief members on the paper. The paper is LC paper number CB brackets 3811/2024 brackets 02. Thank you, Chair. In the 2018 policy address, the government announced that $3 billion would be provided for applications from the local degree awarding institutions on research. And in 2019, the government launched the scheme to expand more research funding sources for the higher education sector, and that would help fund research projects, purchasing of equipment for research, supporting research activities of students, as well as setting up scholarship or funding assistance for students and researchers. And that covered the 8 UGC-funded universities as well as 13 local self-financing degree awarding institutions. The $3 billion have almost all been dispersed. We have seen very good results of the scheme. We have seen publications of research journal articles, monographs, conference papers. We have also seen universities and institutions establishing research centers as well as having commercialized research output. We have patents filed in various fields including machine learning, AI, big data analytics, applied physics, clinical medicine, biomedical engineering, electronics, environmental engineering, digital humanities. Some research has received awards and accreditation and are widely recognized and highly regarded internationally. And we have different organizations, private investors, charitable organizations supporting the research as well in matching basis, and the total amount is about $5.77 billion. And we will in the next 4 years provide a research matching grant of $1.5 billion to encourage the higher education sector to expand their research funding sources and help consolidate Hong Kong's status as an international post-secondary education hub. We will have in the new round a matching arrangement that is similar to the last round. We will, however, make some adjustments. We will perhaps put in a floor as well as a ceiling so that various institutions can take part. For each financial year, the total matching grant disbursed. We will also set up a particular ceiling, and we want to promote continuous collaboration between the universities and institutions. We will apply a suitable upper limit to the total amount of matching grants to be dispersed as well as the matching grants to be received by institutions. We hope to get support of members, and we are more than willing to answer members' questions and hear their feedback. All right, before members speak, I remind members that in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedures, members should disclose the nature of any direct or indirect pecuniary interests relating to the item before they speak on the item. It's now the Q&A session. We have 5 members who have pressed the request to speak button. I'll assign a 4-minute time limit. Questions and answers included. Professor William Wong. Thank you, Chair. Let me first declare that I am a professor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I very much welcome this research matching grant scheme. It is very beneficial to research and development in universities. I have an administrative question. So for the funds from the outside the education sector, can it come from the mainland, Under Secretary?
預長嚇。
My colleague, Mr. Louis Leung, will take that question. Thank you. So, private donations will be fine, but official funding from the mainland will be ineligible. Now we've seen producers of cell phone equipment and listed biomedicine companies that gave money to university for research. That kind of donation will qualify. We want to encourage cross-boundary collaboration to strengthen the INT ecosystem. Any more questions from Professor Wong? So money from the mainland is okay. And we have had such examples. Yes, that has happened. I put this question because under other funding schemes, mainland money got rejected. So I was thinking maybe we can put money in a pot in the mainland and then the money can come to Hong Kong. It's fine as long as mainland donation also works. Any response from the Undersecretary? As Mr. Leung said, money from the mainland also qualifies for the matching grant. As for cross-boundary remittances for businesses, that will be up to individual businesses. I know many contracts are required before you can move things forward, but that's outside the scope of today's discussion. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwok. Thank you, Madam Chair. From 2019 to now, we've seen good results with the previous scheme. So can the government tell us how good the results were? Now, academic journals, seminars, conferences, apart from that, what kind of results have we seen? Can we have more details on the achievements? How many academic journals were published in world-class journals, publications? So how many journal articles have been published? Now, there's all the talk about research, academic, and industry integration. So for the projects that received support, what's the percentage of projects that actually went ahead and reached production? I don't see the figures here. It's okay if the government doesn't have the figures. It's okay for them to give us the information after the meeting. Undersecretary. Ms. Kwok asked about the results from the past. There were journal articles published, papers presented at academic conferences. We also saw patents awards given to projects from research. Our researchers came up with a computing project, and under our country's Natural Sciences Endowment, an award was given to that young researcher. We also got international awards, such as the 2022 Lasker Clinical Research Award, and also there was an award at the Geneva International Expo for Inventions. So those are some examples of research outcomes under the previous scheme being awarded. Now we also have this Center for Cellular Imaging, and there's also an I3 Big Data Lab. And there was also a facility on mapping, on cartography. Now on research, industry, and academic collaboration. Quite a number of research outcomes were commercialized and then patents were obtained. There was a therapy for Huntington's disease. It was a patent for a new treatment for this disease. And then there was also research outcomes on the replacement of kneecaps. So these are some examples of the patents. That's why we say the first round of the research matching grant scheme worked very well. Thank you. Professor James Lau. I'm a professor at Lingnan University. I agree with the Undersecretary. The previous round of the research matching grant scheme worked well. We need outside donations for teaching and research. With the matching grants, outside organizations and individuals think it's a great opportunity for different parties to come together to help foster teaching and research. Now, this paper is about a new round of such matching grants. We welcome this. So are we sticking to the previous approach, or will there be new features under this new matching grant? We welcome the previous approach. But if there are more strings attached, then we may have to look into the scheme and study it, Undersecretary. So we looked at the first round of the matching grant scheme. We are adopting broadly the same approach. We will have this floor and the ceiling. The amount of money involved will be different. We will consult the UGC and the RGC, and we will also be consulting electoral members. There will be a cap for each year on monitoring. Universities will have to set out how the money is spent in annual audited accounts. RGC requirements will also apply when it comes to the breakdown of donations and matching grants. Universities will also have to report on the progress of the work. Mr. Tang Fei. Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this research matching grant scheme. This is nothing new, after all. The paper is silent on intellectual property rights, so for the research outcomes under the scheme, so there are no rules governing IP rights. So the government gives funding, but that does not mean the government will share in the IP rights. But private donations are also involved. Who decides who owns the IP rights? So the universities will talk to the donors, and the government has no position on this. Is that the case? Now, for this matching grant scheme, there are 13 self-financing institutions. Those institutions are weaker than UGC-funded universities in their capacity. And these self-financing institutions may not be as strong in research. They may focus more on teaching. Do we have a breakdown of successful applicants from the past with UGC-funded universities on the one hand and self-financing institutions on the other? Now, the IP question, Mr. Leung can take that question in a moment. First, I will say a few things. For self-financing institutions, let's look at the first round of the matching grant scheme. Most self-financing institutions applied under the scheme. These institutions received matching grants in the end. Self-financing institutions may not be on an equal footing with UGC-funded universities in fundraising capacity, but self-financing institutions did manage to raise funds and they managed to get matching grants. For the second round of this scheme, we have duly considered the needs of self-financing institutions. We looked at the experience from the first round. Now over to my colleague, Mr. Leung, about the point of intellectual property rights. The paper is silent on that, but there will be a set of operational guidelines to universities, and this is in line with the practice in round one. When a patent or any form of IP right from research outcomes, universities can follow their own guidelines in handling such IP rights. The government or the UGC or the RGC has no claim to the IP rights. We want the IP rights to rest with the universities. Now, on a breakdown of successful applicants for UGC universities and self-financing institutions, so UGC funded universities got $2.5 billion or 85% of the funding. Self-financing institutions got $460 million or 15%. Now let's look at the four self-financing institutions. They got $315 million. So we're proposing a flooring and a ceiling. We want equal participation. That way, UGC funded or not, universities can benefit from the next round of this scheme, and we can see development in both streams. Mr. Stanley. Thank you, Madam Chair. The amount is smaller than before. We used to see $3 billion. Why this difference? Other members commented on the great results from the past. Have we had bad experiences from the last round? Can we learn the lessons from those bad experiences so that we can prevent the recurrence of such problems? Why do we have a smaller amount this time? Did something go wrong last time? Undersecretary. Universities spend their matching grants well under round one. We have a robust monitoring system. Universities raise their money and they also spend the matching grants. There's been transparency. In the annual report, universities have to report how they spend the money from the private sector and the government. We have spotted no irregularities. After round one of the matching grant scheme, we noticed universities managed to tap into a wider range of sources in raising funds. This time, the amount is smaller than before. But our goal is where public finances permit, we want to show the government's commitment to the development of the higher education sector, especially given our goal to turn into an international education hub in higher education. Universities with a wider range of funding, especially for their research, are likely to do better in their research. Whatever the amount, this scheme will give universities a stronger incentive to tap into more sources of funding. That's what we want to achieve with round 2.
Chair, can I ask some follow-up questions? Sure. Well, I want to ask how will the Bureau deal with scenarios in which the research doesn't go anywhere and do not produce any outcomes? Do you have a specific ceiling or floor or the upper limit? Do you have the actual amounts that can be shared with us? Thank you, Undersecretary. For the floor, for each institution, it would be $50 million. For the ceiling, it can be as much as $500 million. In the first round. So we have seen institutions claiming this whole amount in the first round. For individual projects, if funding is obtained and they can't complete the projects or they need more time to complete the projects, the RGC and the UGC already have established mechanisms to deal with such cases. Thank you, Chair. Well, so the floor, excuse me, please wait. So, Mr. Stanley asked about both the floor and the ceiling. You only answered the floor. Well, that was in the first round. We did not have such a total amount or ceiling set for the first round. We will set an amount after consulting the relevant institutions and bodies. All right? Is that all right with you, Mr. Stanley? Sure. Dr. Chairman Kong. I welcome this research matching grant scheme. I also support this initiative that was announced in the policy address. And we have seen for the first round, the government provided $3 billion, and the funding coming from the private sector amounted to $5.77 billion. Together with the other rounds of funding for both the UGC universities and the self-financing institutions, I think there are already 11 rounds of funding. We do see very high quality research. We have spent much on projects, but I do see room for improvement. Let me also say this. I am a vice chancellor for a university. I'm also on the boards of 2 universities. We have spent $200 billion on how to developing Hong Kong into an INT hub. Can the UGC dedicate funding into supporting projects that would have realizable outcomes in particular? Because being able to realize research outcomes would be beneficial for the development of the economy of Hong Kong. I also note that in institutions, such matching grants after being dispersed may not be used for the dedicated purpose. they may have allocated such funding to other purposes. It may still be research, but it's not for the dedicated project. I think the Education Bureau and the UGC can be more stringent in auditing to make sure the research outcomes can match the objectives of the funding given. Thank you. Undersecretary. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Chow. We appreciate that we have received the support of the academic sector, and having consulted the higher education sector before, we heard calls for a second round of this research matching grant scheme, and we are glad to say that a new round has been announced in the policy address this year. On research outcomes, I've only mentioned those that are prominent. But let me say this here. With the research matching grant scheme, research areas would include basic research, humanities research, as well as applicable research. We support really any kind of research. I do understand where the member came from, wanting to have realizable research outcomes, having patents filed. But for different subjects, for example, for humanities, compared to science subjects, it may be harder to have realizable research outcomes. We do support the collaboration of the academia, the industry, and the research sector, but then we need to also have regard to the nature of research to make sure we are enhancing research capability in general in Hong Kong. I know that apart from the Education Bureau, the Innovation Technology and Industry Bureau also has funding support for the education sector to conduct research. As for dedicated funding for dedicated projects, how can we make sure the funding is used for the dedicated purpose? We apply stringent monitoring. The UGC and the RGC would audit the relevant budgets and expenditure accounts. If there is misuse of resources, we will follow up with the relevant institutions. Thank you. Mr. Benson Look. Thank you. For the research matching grant scheme, I have 3 points to make. One, on the overall financial position. For the last round of research matching grant scheme, we had $3 billion. And as other members said, for the 2025 round, that would last for 4 years from 2025 to 2029, it would just be $1.5 billion. I understand what the Undersecretary said about the fact that the government is in a tight financial position. The amount has shrunk. I want to ask, is this the sole cause? I do see some very positive results in the first round, so if we can do more for this round, of course, that would be appreciated. With the shrunken amount, there is an implication. We may have less projects that may be supported. So, for the projects that may not be able to get this support, Can you provide them with other kinds of support? How will you direct them to other forms of resources? So I note that the funding from the private sector is approximately 1.92-fold of the government's grant. So do you expect the same results this time round? Thank you. Undersecretary. Thank you for the new round. The amount is more than that for the first round. Our explanation is this. This research matching grant scheme is not a recurrent scheme. So we have reference to the overall situation in the territory as well as the priorities of the Bureau when proposing such funding. As discussed in the first agenda item, we are going to set up a teacher professional development fund amounting to $2 billion. This scheme is on its second round. In the first round, it's not that we have already stopped everything from that round, because there are diversified funding sources for universities and institutions. On a university level, once such connections are made with the business sector or other organizations for other projects of universities, such as hostel development or other research projects, charitable organizations, enterprises, or other organizations may already be supporting the universities and institutions still. And in fact, if we look at the annual reports of universities and institutions, we still see funding being received from the private sector by universities and institutions. We have observed this. That's why we believe we have already achieved what we intended earlier. That is to have universities and institutions have diversified funding sources. We hope to promote still for universities and institutions to develop new sources of funding so that they can be even more diversified in their funding sources. Regarding what Mr. Bezaluk asked about other funding sources, we have a 3-year funding cycle for universities and institutions. We have approximately 20% of the resources going to universities to be used for research. So they do not rely only on this scheme to fund their research. I also want to say this. For the $1.5 billion of matching grants, we expect to attract $2.58 billion from the private sector in funding. In the first round, we had $5.77 billion from the private sector. We believe with the research matching grant scheme, we have helped universities and institutions develop more funding sources, and we believe in the second round we will achieve similar results. Thank you. Professor William Wong, speaking for the second round. Well, I'm not asking for an answer. I want to just follow up on what is said in my first round of questions. So for the donors, if they come from mainland China, they may not be able to bring such funds or such a significant amount of funds to Hong Kong. How will things work? I also have another question. The Undersecretary said earlier that we have achieved great results in the first round. We have out, mid, and downstream research, especially research that can support downstream applications. So I want to ask how we can distinguish this scheme from the other ITC funds? I did not ask this question earlier because UGC and RGC research often focuses on basic research. I think we should tie in better with ITC ITF funding, which is mainly downstream. I think we should distinguish the outcomes from different funding in order to set some KPIs so that we know what the RGC is actually doing. Thank you.
議員嘅
Undersecretary, I thank Professor Wong for his questions. Paragraph 2 sets out the goal of the matching grant scheme. We want our higher education sector to tap into more sources of funding. We want to encourage collaboration between institutions and other sectors. That's what we want to achieve with this new round of scheme. Indeed, as Professor Wong said, there are different funding schemes for innovation and technology. The Education Bureau and the Innovation, Technology and Industry Bureau have different schemes with different goals. For this matching grant scheme, our goal is clear. We want to encourage universities to diversify their sources of funding. The government offers $1, and for that dollar, the university may be able to raise another $1 or $2 or even more. We want that multiplier effect. That way, universities will have more resources for their development, and that will be good. And we also want universities to create this network with businesses, charity groups, non-government organizations. Say you have a university that works with businesses. That tie-up will be positive for commercialization and other developments. Say you have a business in electronics. This business supports a university through donations. And then that university undertakes research projects or wants to commercialize their research outcomes. This tie-up will be positive. So we want to foster that sort of network. Now, finally, it's my turn. I support the research matching grant scheme. I teach at the City University of Hong Kong. I have experience in raising funds. Businesses and universities approach each other. I have received quite a number of inquiries from out of town. Businesses want to partner with good universities. These businesses wonder which universities here can help those businesses, and then they team up on projects. Of course, there will be contracts. The tie-up can take many forms. Many of our local universities have experience. Some are successful. There are certain go-to universities for businesses. So universities already have a good idea what businesses are looking for. So for universities, they have to raise funds. Key performance indicators for universities are often about how much money these universities can raise. Now there's an economic downturn. Raising money should become an even more important KPI. Now, of course, research, academic, and industry collaboration is something already seen in the mainland. Hong Kong should work harder on this. We should encourage commercialization. some professors have become billionaires. Universities enter into contracts with these professors. These contracts encourage research and commercialization. The professors keep their professorship, but at the same time, the professors team up with their universities. Now you can leave the matter to universities. It depends on whether the universities can keep those professors. And in the process, the universities also get part of the intellectual property rights and share in the profits. So for myself, I'm all for the scheme. Policy-wise, let's encourage good businesses to do this. For top-notch businesses, professors flock to those businesses because those businesses make good use of the talent. In Hong Kong, we aren't quite there yet. So this is an area that merits further exploration. Professor William Wong mentioned money coming from the mainland. Even sponsorships can run into problems. It's only when the money is for a professional purpose that the money can come over. So even when a university raises the money is secured, but that money cannot come here. And then the money is stuck in the mainland. So universities give up on mainland funding. So that's money going to waste. This is where help is needed. So that's my suggestion. Food for thought. If there are no other questions, so members, do we support the inclusion of this item in the draft estimate for the 2025-26 fiscal year? Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those against, please raise your hands. Those who abstain, please raise your hands. So most members, in fact, we support this. Thank you.